Hello and welcome to the Bulwark podcast. Surprise, this is not Charlie Sykes here today. You have Amanda Carpenter sitting in with Will Saletan for your Monday chat. Will, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Amanda. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Happy belated Father's Day. You're a father, correct?
Yes, thank
Do
you.
anything fun?
Incredibly lame, which is appropriate. Like, people didn't eat, my kids didn't even laugh at my dad jokes on Father's Day. So I feel
Oh
really
no.
cheated.
I feel like your kids should made you like a big Father's Day cake just full of puns. That didn't happen?
That did not happen. Sadly, that did not. But also, happy Father's Day to your family. I know you just took your kids out to what, SeaWorld, was it?
Oh my gosh, yes. So we've been out and about. They have this pass where you can do SeaWorld, Aquatica, and this place nobody talked Discovery Cove. It is amazing. It is amazing. My husband's been joking that we're boycotting Disney because of all the stuff, but we're not because Discovery Cove is amazing. Um, you get a ticket, you can swim with the dolphins. Like literally, you put on your little life vest, you get into the water with them. This giant 800, 2,000 pound animal is just right there in front of you. You get to pet it. They do tricks. You get to hang on to it. It takes you for a little glide in the water. And honestly, it was a little frightening. I mean, I don't like animals that are bigger than me generally.
Right.
Um, but thank God these things were well behaved because they could just like throw a flipper and knock somebody out. And the funny thing was, I had on like really bright colored swim shorts. And so the dolphin we had, Kendall, everybody goes first, and the trainers are like, well, let's just have the kids first and kind of save Amanda for the end. And apparently the dolphin didn't like brightly colored stuff. So they had to get a different dolphin that wouldn't react to it. I'm like, well, how,
Ooh,
how safe is this here?
you get the wrong dolphin.
Right? But it was
Th-
yeah, they're all
th-
very in charge of it, and all the trainers, I mean, they're really watching the animals to make sure they're comfortable, and they keep doing this, I would ask them, like, how do they do all this stuff? And it's always like, "We don't make them do anything they don't wanna do." I think there's, big reaction to the whole blackfish thing. It's like, the animals are all happy, 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 happy.
right.
Um, but
This is
I Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say this sounds like ideal dad behavior, right? This very large animal. Your kids are gonna like you the humans are gonna cling onto it. The kids are gonna do God knows what to it because they don't really understand how to handle it. And the dolphin just has to handle this all with good humor. I'm large, I'm dangerous, but I am, friendly and will take good care of you.
Yeah, yeah, but that wasn't even so that was obviously the highlight of the day. But the other part of this park, well, no, they also have all you can eat food, which is amazing. Um, but there is a giant, they call it the giant reef. And so they give you a little snorkel and you just get into this giant pool with all these fish, like millions of fish and all kinds
Ooh.
of stingrays. Yeah, obviously they're not they don't have the stinger able, but you're kind of in shallow water where it's like, oh, the cute little fish, right? Like little schools of shiny blue things. And there's a
Oh
chart you can
yeah.
look at. Great, great, great. And there's some stingrays in there, like, okay, little ones. And then you go deeper and deeper. Honestly, I got scared. I looked down and there were these giant stingrays or manta ray. I should go look all this up. I didn't really think I was gonna be talking about all this. But you just see these giant shadows moving beneath you. It is the freakiest thing. Me and my daughter got a little bit freaked out. The boys went in, they saw everything, they went deep, but it was a good time had by all. So, thanks for asking
That's that's
about Father's Day and how much fun I got to have.
That's great. Yeah, then you didn't do the Steve Irwin thing of trying to swim down on top of the ray, which would have been really dumb. So, you live to tell.
No, but you can touch them all. You can touch the whole thing is they go by, you can pet them. The whole idea is to touch them, which is
Mhm.
very weird. I've been to other places where there's a touch tank, you two-finger touch, you put in your fingers and you let it go by. This was totally different, and I think they kinda liked it because they would just do laps around people constantly. Um, so yeah, so that's Florida.
That sounds lovely. I'm really glad you got to do that.
Thanks.
Well, by the way, while we're doing Father's Day, I wanted to say a happy Father's Day. Extend this to Herschel Walker and his various secret families.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I know that's a little bit mean, but after enduring all of the lectures from Herschel Walker, the Republican Senate candidate in Georgia, about other men not taking care of their children, We now know of what, at least two secret families secret kids that he has, with and
Was
the
it 3? I think it's 3
it
children.
might be up to, I don't even know how many we're up to at this point. And once you've honestly, Amanda, as you know, like once you find out the guy has one secret kid, then it's just a question of how many others you don't know about, right? And
Well,
how
no,
many.
I don't know. I'm just kidding. But the best joke about this I saw on Twitter was that we all as Americans have a very important question to consider before the midterms. Is Herschel Walker my father?
That's really good.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess he's just handling it. The campaign's response has been, "Well, we don't use our children on the campaign trail. That's why it's okay. Don't
Right.
worry about it."
Right. And I have to wonder, sorry to drag this out, but I have to
Yeah.
wonder, in whatever vetting was done of Herschel Walker by the Republican establishment, by Mitch McConnell, by whoever, like how many of these people had no idea that he had an extra kid, right?
I don't know, this one seems pretty obvious because the woman had to take Herschel to court to establish paternity and get child support. So there's court records somewhere, right? Are these all sealed? I feel like this was probably easy to discover. And once Trump decided that Herschel Walker was going to be the Republican nominee, what? What are they gonna do about it? Mitch McConnell isn't gonna fire that oppo on him, knowing that Trump is gonna like this is a disqualifier for Donald Trump, really.
Right. And so if they knew that he had that, then they had also presumably pulled this or somehow tested it and decided that voters were totally cool with it. And but somehow failed to stop him from going on and lecturing other men, which really was a bad idea given what was in his closet.
But that's been something he's been doing for years, right? This is part of his being a role model as a NFL football player, blah blah blah. Like this has been his shtick probably while the children were, babies, right?
Yeah.
Ugh, well, it's sad. I feel bad for those kids. I mean, I don't know if they'll be of an age where they wanna say something, but it's gotta be very bizarre to know that your father is this famous person who is held up as a role model for Christian families and have to sit there and watch this unfold, and maybe, they're 10 or 14 or 15 now, but as adults, I feel like that has to burn. That would burn me. Just speaking as a person, if that happened to me, I would have a lot of resentment.
Yeah, it's funny, Amanda. I never thought of it that way. That is really interesting. A lot of people are familiar with the situation where someone is living a secret gay life and they have like a long term partner. And that partner has to pretend that they're not married, that they're not together, that, this life isn't happening. Sometimes there used to be like a beard marriage and a for show heterosexual marriage to hide the politician's actual same-sex relationship, often a long-term relationship, and that was understood to be really painful for that person. But the idea here that this is your parent and you can't say anything about it, that's so hard for the kid.
Yeah, and maybe the mother is keeping it a secret from who knows? Who knows? But they're being told some kind of story, and I hope Herschel reconciles with his kids in some way at some point. If it takes a campaign to do that, I guess, I wouldn't begrudge the children for trying to get to know their father. Maybe this will give them the opportunity. I'm not saying it's a good look for Herschel, but in these scenarios, I always wonder what these kids are going through because life seems to be pretty easy for Herschel Walker, and now those kids are getting dragged into this um, through a campaign in which they really have no defense or voice or support, even.
Yep. So happy Father's Day to all the guys out there. Take care of your kids and pay attention to what their needs are. And
Yeah,
then
do as Herschel Walker says, not as he does. How about that one? Okay. Well, flipping back to other news events on Capitol Hill, I assume you've been following all the January 6th committee hearings. And one thing that I am interested in that largely happened over the weekend, I would say, has been Trump's reaction to it. He went to Tennessee to give a big speech to the Faith and Freedom Coalition, which is an influential evangelical audience. And I watched that speech, and all I could think is he is proving the committee's point here, right? Like
Yep.
when he stands up there and again threatens Mike Pence, says that he was weak, he didn't have the courage to do what he needed to do, mocks Bill Barr for trying to protect the president from another impeachment. All of this just proves the committee's point that Donald Trump still continues to be a threat. And we do have some sound here. Let's listen to that part. And Will, on the other end, you can give me your reaction.
One guy got up and said that he heard me calling Mike Pence a wimp. Now, in honesty, I'm the president of the United States. You know, I'm sitting, I think they said at my desk, he's a wimp. How many people listen to me? Is it like, I don't even know who these people are. But I never called Mike Pence a wimp. I never called him a wimp. Mike Pence had a chance to be great. He had a chance to be, frankly, historic. But just like Bill Barr and the rest of these weak people, Mike, and I say it sadly because I like him, but Mike did not have the courage to act. Bill Barr was afraid of certain things, and you know what they were. Please don't impeach me. Don't impeach me, Bill Barr. Please. I said, what's wrong with being impeached? I got impeached twice, and my poll numbers went up. But Mike was afraid of whatever he was afraid of. But as you heard a year and a half ago, Mike Pence had absolutely no choice but to be a human conveyor belt. So I said to Mike, if you do this, you could be Thomas Jefferson. And then after it all went down, I looked at him one day and I said, Mike, hate to say this, but you know Thomas Jefferson. And look at our country now. Look at our country now.
All right. So, Will.
Oh my goodness, Amanda. I could spend the entire conversation on this. Okay, so first of all, just the politics of it. The whole Republican game plan for 2022, and frankly for 2024, if they can pull it off, is let's not talk about the past. They're not talking about the January 6th hearings. They don't want to talk about January 6th at all. They want to talk about, to the extent that we're going to talk about Donald Trump's presidency, it was about his policies. We like the policies. That all business that happened at the end, let's just forget about that, right? Except that Donald Trump will not allow that to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's intent in this speech on defending his position, not on judges, not on taxes, not on the military, but on overturning the election. Exactly what Republicans don't want to talk about. So it is a problem for them now, and it will be a problem as long as he is a prominent person in the party, and certainly if he's their nominee in 2024. Secondly, here we are on Father's Day weekend. This guy, Trump, talking about Mike Pence being a wimp. And let's be clear, according to Ivanka Trump's office, she said that what she heard in that conversation was her father calling Mike Pence a 5-letter word that begins with P. Okay, so here's an idea that Donald Trump has about what strength and wimpiness is about. The other point of view, which I think is shared by most people, is that if you lose an election and you can't admit it, that's weakness, right? That is not a model of masculinity. That is not a model of courage. That is a model of weakness. You're a child. You're a child if you can't admit that. And so Mike Pence was the adult. Mike Pence did the manly thing, and Donald Trump did the childish thing. The third thing I just want to say about this is that there is in Mike Pence, we've had an argument among our Bulwark colleagues about whether Mike Pence was a hero or not, right? And a lot of us sort of gag on the idea, hold our noses. Mike Pence stood by Donald Trump and everything he did for 4 years. But at the end, Mike Pence broke from Trump over the very simple idea that one man cannot decide who is the next president of the United States, will not override the election. That is a very simple affirmative model for conservatives, for Republicans, and for people who supported Donald Trump and his policies for all those years.
On that point, were you surprised to hear Chairman Benny Thompson call Mike Pence a hero and give him his due in the hearing? Do you think that worked?
Well, I don't know if it worked. I applaud
Mhm.
it, and
Yeah.
and
Oh, did you
and
like it? That's a better way of
I
phrasing it.
loved it. I
Yeah.
loved it. Okay, Amanda, I just have to admit, okay, and all of us bull workers have our own personalities. I am a sap. I'm a total sap for bipartisanship, for like, like here, because we're fighting, right, for some very basic things that all of us should agree on:
Yeah.
democracy, the republic, the rule of law, the separation of powers, et cetera. And so we can disagree about policy all we want. So when Benny Thompson says about Mike Pence, we don't agree about almost anything, which is what he said in the hearing, but
Mhm.
we agree on this. That is a really, really, to me, a really crucial model for the way all Americans should think about January 6th and the attempt to overturn the election. What do you think?
I think it was politically smart to do. I liked it, even though I don't totally agree with the idea that Mike Pence is a hero because he enabled all this into the last minute. My take on the Mike Pence thing for the good of the Bulwark discussion here is that he wasn't a hero. He just wasn't willing to be history's greatest monster. He looked at what Donald Trump was asking of him in the early days of January and said, "I can't do this. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal." I He wouldn't put himself in that position because it wasn't doable, right? Like this is a thing that happened many times as Trump rose, consolidated power, and came into the presidency. Everyone would enable his worst instincts until it came right on their plate. And at that point, you only had the worst people willing to do his bidding. Michael Cohen, who went to jail. Like Mike Pence is not going to jail for Donald Trump, right?
Mhm.
But all the way up to that moment, he was willing to look the other way and say, this is the greatest honor of his life. And, I kind of made that decision about Pence when I watched him participate in all the stop the steal rhetoric going into the Georgia runoffs. And he would give speeches at that time and choose his words so carefully about how, a lot of Americans think there was something wrong with the election and we're going to fight and see this through to the end. He wouldn't actually say the election was stolen, but standing up in those podiums and saying those kinds of words, he was signaling to everyone in the audience around him that he agreed with Trump when he actually didn't. He actually didn't when it came down to it. And this is why, he did save our democracy in the end, but he also allowed it to get to that point, right? He knew there were discussions being had with John Eastman about how he could overthrow the election, but somehow it wasn't until January that he could say something about it. He didn't issue that statement until the morning of January 6th about how he would certify the election. What if he had issued a statement earlier in December? Would the mob have come to Washington that day if they knew Mike Pence was not going to do it? The reason they were there that day is because they thought they had a chance. And Mike Pence allowed people to think that chance was something that they should act upon. And I'm not saying if he would have said he would certify the election earlier, like, after the states certified the elections in mid-December, that was the point where Mike Pence needed to say something. That was then. All the legal options had been run out. But because he waited until that last moment, he put his own life in danger just as much as Donald Trump did.
That's really interesting. So here's what you're making me wonder. So Mike Pence was in the very distinctive situation of being the guy who had to preside over January 6th, which put him on the spot. So he had to go up. He had to go one way or the other, either like
Mhm.
interfere in the counting or not, and he didn't. But what you're making me wonder is if Mike Pence had been a senator, say, and somebody else had been in the vice president's position, would Mike Pence, the senator, have spoken up in defense of against overturning the election? And I think you
Mm.
make a what you're saying makes a good case that he would not. That if he had not literally had to go one way or the other, he would have kept his silence. Because as you're pointing out, everything he said leading up to January 6th was not exactly claiming that the election had been stolen, but it was kind of stolen adjacent. It was like there were
Mhm.
irregularities. And so everyone has right to be suspicious of this election. And then at the end, he has to make the call. So I do think that undermines the case, for Mike Pence, the hero.
Yeah, I am willing to give him hero status for him standing in that garage and saying, "I will not leave." I do think that took a tremendous amount of not just courage, but commitment to the process
Hmm.
because he could have left, right? I think there were people talking about how Mike Pence maybe wouldn't preside over the certification and Chuck Grassley would do it. And so he could have walked away at that moment. And I'm not certain. I do believe there's a strong chance that the Secret Service would have taken him to some kind of secure location where he couldn't have come back.
Right. Okay. So that situation, can we talk just for a bit about the loading dock or wherever he
Yeah,
was
please.
under the Capitol? He's down there, right? And so you're right in that for that period of time, he's the one making the phone calls to get the government up and running and bring in the guard and whatever. And he's the one who refuses to leave, and he's determined to make sure they go through with it. But I think that was true of other of members of Congress too. Like it almost what happened after the attack on the Capitol had begun was almost an illustration of the general proposition that people are, I mean, I think people are cowards by and large, but when they're up against it,
Yeah.
in the worst moments, we're at our best. And I feel like a lot of people who were cowards right up until that moment, including members of Congress, just, when the physical attack was underway, they said, okay, this is just too far, and we're going to go through and make sure that we certify the election tonight. Do you agree with?
Well, no, I'm also mulling over the scenario in which Mike Pence was a senator. Would he have certified the election, raised an objection, or not certified it, or two of those three? You have to combine 2 and 3 together. I'm not
Hmm.
sure. I don't think he would have certified it. I don't know.
And there was one other thing you said that maybe I wanted to ask you about. So you said that that Pence decided that at the end, when Trump wanted him to use his power over the proceedings to overturn the election, he said it wasn't really doable.
Mhm.
I mean, it was doable, right? I mean, it could have been done, and John Eastman had sketched out how it could be done. So the couldn't be done wasn't really a practical thing, it was a moral thing. And for someone to say, it's not, I can't do this, is not literally that they can't do it. It's that they are up against some moral code of theirs that will not allow them to proceed. No?
Um, I maybe a little of both. I do tend to think it was more practical because he surveyed, right, he made all those phone calls to Dan Quayle, to Paul Ryan, to anyone he could think of, asking them their opinion of whether he could go through with this. So he clearly was thinking about it. He didn't have a moral call where he just rejected it outright. When you believe in something that is morally right and true, you don't do a survey of your top 100 closest friends to see if they agree with you or not.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, okay, here's what I'm thinking. So what we've learned in the hearing is about the process that Pence went through, right? So he's talking to his counsel, Greg Jacob. He was he talking directly to Judge Ludig, or was George? Anyway, he got the
Mhm.
guidance from Judge Ludig and from Dan Quayle and from others. And you're right, he surveyed more than one person about this. But what they're telling him is not that you practically can't do this, but that there's nothing in the Constitution that would warrant it, that it would offend the basic principles of the Constitution about concentration of power. So everything that's being said to him is a legal argument, it's a moral argument. And so to the extent that he honored that, I do feel like that's a moral position that he took. It's a position in compliance with the rule of law.
Yeah. Well, we could debate the Mike Pence question endlessly, and I think we will because it does sort of get to the central question of what happened that day.
Yeah.
Right, and I'm happy to have others confer upon him hero status, but I'm sort of golf clapping and side-eyeing from afar, but, I do wanna get your take on another part of the Trump speech when it comes to pardons. So I was surprised, not really that Trump was calling Pence a weakling, although it was kind of funny, right? In the whole windup of the Pence talk, Trump was saying, "I didn't call him a wimp. I just said he's weak." And there's really no difference there. But when it comes to the January 6th committee talking about why the investigation is needed, they always return to the fact that the threat continues. And when Donald Trump talked about extending pardons to all the rioters, my eyebrows shot up. Let's play that sound.
Even while January 6th defendants are having their lives totally destroyed and being treated worse than terrorists and murderers, despite most being charged with parading through the Capitol. Most people should not be treated the way they're being treated. And if I become president someday, if I decide to do it, I will be looking at them very, very seriously for pardons, very, very seriously. They've been treated very unfairly. Should I decide to do that?
So, if Trump decides to become president, just think about that. If he decides to become president, he's going to very seriously think about pardons for the rioters. I think that counts as his 2024 first campaign promise.
Yeah, it's God bless Donald Trump. I mean,
What?
he's so awful that a more clever autocrat would just keep his mouth shut. He would find some euphemism, but Trump is right out there saying, "What's that cartoon, Amanda? The one where like people are it's like the wolf. The wolf is saying, 'I'm going to eat you,' and the sheep are saying, 'I like
Yeah.
him. He says what he means.'
The Far
He
Side.
tells. Oh, that's what it was. The part he tells it like it is." The guy is out there. Meanwhile, his party is trying so hard to pretend that he isn't this, and he insists on being himself. First of all, he's reminding everyone of the pardons that he did as president, which were
Mhm.
insanely corrupt. He
Steve
pardoned
Bannon
everyone.
thanks him.
Steve, yes, Roger Stone. I mean, anyone who protected Donald Trump got a pardon. So he advertised his corruption. But the a lot of Republican mythology about the Trump presidency and about why Trump was a great president, according to them. So we have to have a distinction in Republican ideology between conservatives and people who support Donald Trump, MAGA, and all, like, they're all good people, right? And then there were some of these people who went to this rally, this Stop the Steal rally on the Ellipse on January 6th. And then some subset of them actually went to the Capitol and committed violence. And some subset of them were like the Proud Boys, and they had all conspired to do this before Trump spoke. So none of that was his fault. So there are all these distinctions that the Republican establishment wants to draw between Trump supporters and the actual January 6th defendants. And in this speech, as your quote illustrates, Trump he's not defending MAGA. He's not defending like Republicans in general or conservatives or people who support the Trump presidency. He says the January 6th defendants, right? Not even the crowd, not even people who walked to the Capitol and stood outside while the violence happened, people who were arrested, people who were charged, right? So he's going right to the core of the violence and saying, those people, the people who did that, I'm defending them. And that is politically a nightmare for the Republican Party, I think.
But is Donald Trump an outlier on this? And the only reason I ask that is because when you listen to that sound, you hear an evangelical audience clapping and cheering, just like you heard the cheers when he was calling Mike Pence weak and not having the courage to beat Thomas Jefferson, whatever that means, because I'm not sure how that relates to the overturning of an election. But when you say that a more clever authoritarian would hide the ball, I don't know, these crowds seem to like it.
Well, this crowd, the Ralph Reed crowd, and forgive me, I am not Christian, but I know many people. I know many people who are. They are authentically Christian, and uh, they observe some of the basic. Let's just take Jesus as a model, right, of behavior, right? None of this is sort of Jesus-like. This is not turn the other cheek. This is, as Charlie and I have discussed, this is sort of load the other round conservatism, not turn the other cheek conservatism. It's about violence. It's about confrontation, and forgive me, but when I hear a right wing white evangelical audience applauding stuff like this, I no longer think, they're betraying Christianity. I just think these people are not, they're idolaters, right? They worship the AR-15, they worship MAGA, they worship Donald Trump, who is kind of a golden calf. So I think, honestly, I'm more Christian than these people are, and I'm Jewish. So, you know, it just doesn't surprise me anymore, Amanda, when I hear a right wing evangelical audience applaud stuff like this. But you are authentically in this area, so I would love to hear what you think of them.
Yeah, well, I think these are political organizations where, at least for the purposes of gathering, the Christian faith and freedom stuff is really just part of the marketing. It's part of the soft sell, but we're really here to talk about politics, right? They're really here to hear about how to beat the Democrats, how they're better than the Democrats, how the Democrats are evil, which sort of gets into that biblical worldview being weaponized, which we see a lot more of today than I think ever before the rise of Trump. I'm sure there'd be a lot of liberals that disagree with me on that point because people always did kind of weaponize their faith, but I think the comfort, the brazenness, in which it's being done today, especially with extremist groups like Patriot Front, where they're infiltrating pro-life rallies, talking about, strong families, which of course, like who doesn't want strong families, strong faith? But what they're using that as a billboard to hide behind is something much more nefarious because it leads to extremists storming into the Capitol on January 6th to overturn an election. And so I think it's kind of just become virtue signaling for
Hmm.
for extremist political agenda, at least that kind of audience. Not all Christians, definitely not. I talk with a lot of people who are so uncomfortable with the direction the party has gone, that are sitting on the sidelines, but they're not going to quit voting for Republicans because of it, even though they're uncomfortable with it because of the net political goal, which is
Hmm.
keep electing Republicans. And so it's uncomfortable for sure. And I'm just very worried that people just be clapping a message about pardoning rioters. I think that's just I haven't seen something like that before. Maybe I missed something. I'm sure somebody would give me an example from years ago, but this has just become a normal thing.
That's such a good point about the what was the message that they were clapping for. I mean, look, I can at least understand a pro-life evangelical who says, "Look, I really believe that every abortion is a murder." And say what you want about Donald Trump, he was an awful person, but he gave us three justices on the Supreme Court. We're going to overturn Roe v. Wade now, and forgive me, but that's a calculation I made, and it's worth it to save the babies, right? I disagree with that person, but I can understand that reasoning. What I can't understand is that what this audience was applauding, as you point out, wasn't a pro-life message that he was delivering there that they're applauding. It was, overturning an election. It was the distinction between Trump and Pence, right? I mean, Mike Pence gives you anything good from a morally conservative point of view that Donald Trump would have given you. Plus, authentically, Mike Pence is a moral conservative. He lives the life, and he embodies all that. And he was for all the same justices, but he drew the line at overturning an election. And the idea that this audience would choose to applaud Donald Trump as he's separating himself from Mike Pence on that question tells you that it's not about the judges. It's not about the babies. It's not about the living. It's not really about virtue. It's not even about virtue signaling. It's about vice signaling. It's about
Mhm.
the ways in which Donald Trump was vicious and Mike Pence wasn't.
Yeah, and here's something that you made me think of while you were speaking. That is an audience Mike Pence should be speaking to, right? It is a
Hmm.
Christian, conservative audience that likes to quote Bible verses and pray at their breakfast and do fundraising for pro-life groups. Mike Pence should be speaking before that audience, but he wasn't. Mike Pence
Hmm.
is 2024 hopeful, right? By all indications. This conference was the type of event that 2024 hopefuls would go speak before. Mike Pence wasn't there. He didn't even go. I'm sure he was invited. Why didn't he go? I mean, I don't know the exact reasons. Maybe he had a scheduling conflict, or maybe he didn't want to be at the same conference that Donald Trump was at.
Yeah, no, it would have been quite awkward given what Donald Trump was going to say. I think they all know that they can't trust Trump to stick to an authentically moral script. He's going to do his because he's a narcissist. But
But
the
how
other
could
thing.
Pence go there and speak for the same audience that Trump stands in front of and says Mike Pence was weak? Right? Like that's not an audience for Mike Pence anymore. I guess which speaks to my further alarm about this, but that should be made for Mike Pence. But
Mhm.
now even Mike Pence has been ostracized. I mean, he might have been booed there because of the simple fact that he believed in certifying the election.
Right. And this connects back to what we were saying before about, and you were asking before about Benny Thompson signaling, that he disagrees with Mike Pence on politically, but they agree on this. So that's a gesture across partisan lines, right? But the committee all didn't just gesture across partisan lines. And by the way, all these witnesses are Republican, and that's very deliberate. And so that's the whole thing is a signal that this is bipartisan. But the committee also sent signals to the faith community, like it's the millions and millions, tens of millions of Americans who are sincere in their Christian or other faith. And I mean, it was wild to me to see Pete Aguilar asking, Greg Jacob about, did your faith guide you? Like, because liberals are supposed to like believe in separation of church and state. We don't talk about religion, but they're asking about faith. And this is obviously all prepared. And Greg Jacob talks about, that on January 6th, he's going to Daniel
I
and
got chills down my spine at that point.
absolutely. Mark Short talking about how he's texting Second Timothy to Mike Pence. These are people like they're quoting scripture and they're quoting parts of scripture that go to the ethics of standing and doing the right thing in a very difficult time.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw, there was an ABC News poll that came out yesterday, maybe this morning, about how closely people were paying attention to the hearings. And it said that about 33% of Americans were paying attention. What do you think about that? High, low, better, worse than you expected?
That's better than I expected. I've
Yeah.
seen lower numbers for like people paying close attention. But I got to say, this is one of the things about coming to the Bulwark. I like you meet all these different personalities, and I like everybody has a point of view, and I like to listen and think about it. And this is the Sarah Longwell personality. I am the first time that I said something like, but people just don't care about democracy. It's not a voting issue. They're going to vote on inflation, gas prices, whatever. And Sarah basically said, we have to make them care,
Yeah.
like not make, you're going to force people, but like it is an important issue. We are going to talk about it because it's important. We're not going to say like, an objective passive media, oh, people don't care, so we won't talk about it. No, this is important. So we will talk about it. That's our job. And so Sarah kind of lives her life in the imperative mode, not like how things are going to be, but what must we do? What should we do? How should we live? And so that's kind of my response to questions about people watching the hearings. I don't know if not enough people are watching, but I'm glad we're doing the hearings. And I want to do my part to broadcast the hearings and talk about the hearings so that people will pay attention to this very important issue, the most important issue.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that they thought that number was too low, not good. I think it's pretty good. I mean, 33% of people paying close attention to this stuff. I mean, it's so complex. It really is. You talk about the seven different ways that Trump tried to overturn the election. And on that point, the messaging of it, I've heard other people say, well, Donald Trump wasn't that sophisticated. There's no way that he could execute a 7-point plan. And where I've had to reframe them a little bit and say, but Donald Trump. He would do anything possible. He's willing to try things, right? Like this was just him trying to over the election by any means possible. And these are the 7 ways that he tried. And so that may be just a little bit of a messaging difference, but I do think saying he was willing to do anything illegal or unconstitutional to overthrow the election, and here's why we prove it, does make a little more sense than like, look at this blueprint of the 7-point plan. But maybe I'm just being too picky.
Well, I thought originally that he wouldn't have succeeded if Mike Pence hadn't, if Pence had gone through because the court would intervene or whatever. But I think Jamie Raskin pointed out this weekend that if Trump could have stalled this, let's say Pence doesn't throw it back to the states, but I mean he doesn't overrule the states, but he says, look, we're not sure about these electors. It remains to be seen. If he stalls it out, that it can constitutionally end up in the House, one
Mhm.
delegation, one state, and then Republicans could have won that fight. So it's not clear to me that Trump would have failed. The other thing I would say about it is, although Trump is a buffoon in 100 ways, one thing that never failed Trump was his sheer will to power, as demonstrated by the fact that he was willing to provoke violence on January 6th. And what has really struck me over the 4 years of Trump's presidency was the extent to which just this idiot being determined to keep power and do what he wanted, so many Republicans got out of his way. They just didn't want it bad enough to, as long as they were getting policy concessions they agreed with, they were willing to let him do what he wanted. And so the fact that he was a buffoon did not stop them from rolling over for him. And that makes me very afraid of how much he could have accomplished.
Good point. I want to get your take, Will, on a big question that's been bubbling, I think largely on the left, about how the committee needs to make a criminal referral. Where do you come down on that?
So here I'm kind of a wimp, or whatever the word Donald Trump would use is. I don't think it is essential to indict or convict Donald Trump. I really don't. I think it would have been better if we had impeached him. I think it is important to keep Donald Trump out of power forever. And so I'm agreement on that. But I guess the argument is, first of all, that he did violate the law, and secondly, that as it would be a deterrent somehow to future presidents trying this
Mhm.
if we convicted him. So I don't think it
Yeah,
is. I think
future
that
note to future presidents. Please don't send a mob to the Capitol to try to overturn it. That would be nice. Sincerely, America.
and I and Amanda, this is something that I think you would probably agree with. Like, it drives me crazy to see all of these hawks in the Republican Party who are like, we mustn't appease Vladimir Putin. We must send a clear
Right.
message that you will pay a price if you invade a country, and we must send a message to Xi and all of these other autocrats. And when an autocrat happened in our own country, these hawks rolled over like doves, and they have no sense of the same logic of do not appease, make him pay a price, deter. So that does gall me, but I'm not sure that it is necessary to prosecute him to do that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I guess I get very annoyed when I hear, uh, liberals demand that the committee do this because I look at what the committee is doing, and it's like they're giving the public and the Department of Justice all the evidence they need. Like, this isn't a question for the committee. The committee, I understand criminal referrals for contempt of Congress, right? Because that's firmly within their wheelhouse. They're saying, "Hi, we're running this investigation. We'd like this person to speak with us." They're refusing, you know, Department of Justice, we'd like you to do something about that. Firmly in
Hmm.
their wheelhouse. But the House of Representatives should not be prosecuting crimes. They're running the investigation. And so I implore my liberal friends, if you do want to make this a talking point or you want to make this case, you should say the January 6th committee is giving evidence that Merrick Garland cannot ignore. How could Merrick Garland ignore all this testimony? Earlier this week, people from the Department of Justice were saying that they needed the January 6th committee to turn over all their transcripts because it had something to do with some of their prosecutions. What are you talking about? They're giving the public all the evidence, right? Like we get it all. There's videos. What more do you need? You need this to go after like some lower level rioter? Okay, fine. That can work itself off. They're going to be sitting in jail for the next 2 to 5 years as they fight this thing. But meanwhile, all the big evidence about how Donald Trump put Mike Pence's life in danger and squeezed all these election officials from state and local levels and, did the false electors plot. You're telling me you can't do anything about that? I just think Merrick Garland can't ignore this, in any further pressure you put on the January 6th committee to do something that it's functionally not designed to do is extremely counterproductive.
I agree with that. I agree with all of that. And, I'm reminded of the Mueller investigation where, the fact, Mueller does this report. He lays out all the facts. He documents all kinds of connections between the Trump campaign and the Russians, like the Trump Tower meeting where they literally took, here, we'll give you information from the Russian government to help you in the election. Yes, we'll take it. Right. So all that is laid out as facts. But then Mueller does not charge, right? That there's no
Yeah.
prosecutor, Department of Justice doesn't prosecute. And that was taken the lack of a lack of prosecution as evidence that Trump did nothing wrong, right? So I
Well,
think it's
because
just
Bill
important.
Barr ran leaps around everybody with that memo that he selectively, took portions from. And I'm sorry, the news media failed on that one. They ate up that release from Bill Barr when it was garbage. They could have just waited a few more days to get the real report, but they were so desperate for breaking news that they were fed garbage, and that took hold.
Right,
I'm so mad
right.
about it.
I wouldn't want the lack of a prosecution to undermine the base. I mean, I think you're totally right about the committee, Amanda. That's not their job. And honestly, when I look at these hearings so far, what I see is the committee is not really trying here to prosecute. The committee is just trying to establish what are the facts, what
Mhm.
happened here, right? There was this riot. It was provoked by Donald Trump, if not on January 6th, by what he tweeted on December 19th. Everybody responding to that. They draw all the connections. They have all the documentation. Then Trump being told that it was illegal for him to try to overturn the election through Pence. He tries it anyway. So they're just establishing what really happened here, and that is such an important public service. I don't think it is necessary and to prosecute. And I agree with you that to the extent that happens, that's a DOJ call, not a committee call.
Yeah. One other thing about that ABC News poll, that I found surprising was that 6 in 10 Americans believe Trump should be charged with crimes. Not really speaking to the question of criminal referrals. That's inside baseball. Nobody cares. But 6 in 10 Americans think the former president should be charged with crimes.
Yep. And honestly, I mean, so many Republicans don't think that Donald Trump did anything wrong and are willing to reelect him. I'm really playing for, keep Trump below 40% because the number one threat to America and the world is that he returns to power. And as long as there's enough people who will vote against him for president, that will protect America.
Mm. So, outside of Washington, there are other problems like inflation. Do you think that's gonna matter more than any of this?
Yeah, it's certainly, I mean, to the extent that Republicans return to power in the midterms, it'll be because of inflation. And this is look, I come from a Democratic background. Charlie always razzes me for saying that, but I think for various reasons it's better to have the Democrats in control of the House than Republicans. But and Democrats have not tried to overturn this election, so that's to their credit. But
Wow,
Democrats
setting the bar high there.
but there's a reason why a lot of people are going to vote Republican, and that is that Democrats are often not good at understanding how the economy works, and inflation is an illustration of that. One of the things that progressives like to believe is help people in need, and that's great. Do help people in need, but there was an idea among Democrats that we need to make sure that we pump a lot of money into households so that they can come back from COVID, and that's great. And we have a full employment economy now. But at some point, if you pump too much money into the economy and people have too much money to spend, then you have too much demand chasing too little supply, and that's what's causing the inflation. And so a lot of progressives who thought, well, let's raise everyone's wages. Well, if you raise, what we ended up with is a 5% increase in wages and an 8% increase in the cost of goods. And when you've just set people back, so you have to understand how markets work if you're going to help people, and that's something at which progressives have not done a great job.
Yeah, one thing, and I don't know if I should be worried about this or not. It is generally a good thing that you see Democratic leaders sort of trying to set expectations about how this isn't going away. I saw some of that happening on the Sunday shows, admitting this is not transitory. But at the same time, it's like, okay, so is this going to get worse? Like, what is the plan here? There's no plan other than, I guess, more interest rates hikes. We just had a big one. There's going to be another one. It's going to further freak people out, but that's the only medicine that cures this. And so, who gets the blame?
Yeah, yeah, and this goes exactly to the sort of irony of Republicans all claiming, and Liz Cheney, when she was in leadership, also always accused Democrats of being socialists, right? Oh, a Democratic socialist this, socialist that, and the irony of it all is that the number one reason why inflation is going to persist, despite Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi knowing how awful it is for them politically, is that the government doesn't control the economy, right? Not in the United States of America, not in all these Western European countries which people accuse of socialism. And so he has such limited levers. Amanda, you're pointing out the Fed. The biggest thing is but Biden doesn't control the Fed. And the oil companies and their sort of the refinery capacity. Biden can he sends a letter to the oil companies, please produce more, but he can't make that happen. The way that with the speed that would be necessary to save him and his party politically. So capitalism is kind of doing in the quote unquote party of socialism.
But let me be a little bit provocative here. Isn't high gas prices, sort of the plan to get people off oil? Like, isn't this kind of what Democrats have wanted to make the transition to more fuel efficient vehicles, et cetera?
So I would say no, and it's not at this pace. I think Democrats do want to move people to, and I think, look, just lay my cards on the table here. I am an absolute believer in climate change and the urgency of it, and that we absolutely need to move away from fossil fuels for that reason, among others. And it is absolutely true that to the extent that gas prices rise, people are more likely to move to electric vehicles and move to renewables and all that stuff. But nobody wanted prices to rise at this rate. This is crazy. This is crazy, and people can't handle it. You want stable, gradual change. So we aren't ready. We haven't put together enough of the infrastructure of a renewables based energy grid. So
Yeah, I'm not making the case for high gas prices, but it seems to me if you are a progressive that believes in getting off oil, this should represent some kind of opportunity to make that case. There was a good bumper sticker I saw. I laughed because I thought it was pretty clever. It said, gasoline is priced at the point of extinction, which I'm like, yeah, right?
Hmm.
It's a limited, finite resource. It's going away at some point. If high gas prices don't get people to try to make some kind of effort at conservation, even if it's unwillingly, nothing will.
Yeah, but this is part of why I am a sort of Bill Clinton, Barack Obama kind of moderate Democrat. You have to do these transitions artfully with a good political sensibility, or it will backfire on you. If you really believe in the urgency of climate change, as I do, you have to make this transition palatable to people. And the danger here is that the prices of gas rose so fast, and people do not have the ability to go. The price of an electric vehicle is still too high for ordinary people. So you can't just throw people into this situation. And so what Republicans are doing right now is framing a choice between, the transition to non-fossil fuels and what you can afford, and that's very destructive in the long term, because you want people to believe that they can move away from fossil fuels in an economically survivable way. And if you force them into a choice, they will say, damn it, we need gas, let's pump more gas, and screw solar, screw electric, screw all that other stuff.
Yeah, I guess I'd say I'm a conservative because I don't believe that there is a government capable of creating that elegant solution that glides people slowly into a more responsible fuel conservation future.
Yeah.
And you need sharp shocks actually to do it.
Well, I agree with you about that. The government may not be able to do it. And in fact, Amanda, one of the arguments on the right is that, actually, from people who believe in climate change, people who are not denying climate change, is the we are moving away from fossil fuels. We are moving in other directions. And it is being driven
By
in
Elon
part by.
Musk and the Tesla. That's for you, Charlie, just to make sure you're listening.
Up until this crazy spike in oil prices and gas prices, it was being driven by the price of oil, and that, so economics was doing the job, was the argument, and it is still true. Economics will do the job, but not at this pace.
Yeah. Okay. Well, while Republicans are in a totally undeserved catbird seat, given inflation, last point before we get out of here today, did you have a chance to see what the Texas Republican Party is planning for 2022?
Oh my goodness, tell me about it.
Well, they had their convention over the weekend. Here are the highlights of as a part of their new party platform. They've decided that Biden's election is not legitimate. They have said that homosexuality is a quote abnormal lifestyle. They kicked out the log cabin Republicans. John Cornyn was booed by the audience for daring to participate in bipartisan gun legislation reform discussions. And Dan Crenshaw was attacked by a group of MAGA social media influencers who chanted, "I Patch McCain" at him.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Where's that line of scripture that says you're supposed to mock people who wear eye patches because they served their country in war?
I'm going to have to ask Pence counsel Greg Jacob to look up that one for me because I didn't find it.
Yeah, and also to be hearing about abnormal lifestyles from, the party of the guy on his third marriage, and the guy who has at least two secret children, maybe three. Irony is dead. Irony is dead, Amanda.
Yeah, I guess, the question is, I look at this and say, okay, you are the Texas Republican Party. You're gonna win, right? More than likely. You're going into a great midterm election year. The Democrats don't really pose a threat to you. And do you do this because you feel so secure in your winning that you just go hog wild? Or is this just the most menacing part of the Republican Party taking over? I'm not sure.
Can I raise one other point about this? That if the return to gay bashing, or whatever you want to call it, criticizing homosexuality per se, and that platform language that you were just quoting is not just about same-sex marriage, right? It's about, like, you're being gay per se. And I believe that they're trying to reestablish the right for employers to
Yeah.
discriminate against you just for being gay.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
they oppose any kind of criminal or civil penalties for people who oppose homosexuality out of, I think, faith, conviction, whatever that is, conviction, you just feel like it, or there was one other stipulation. But basically, if you don't like gay people, you can discriminate them, and the Texas Republican Party doesn't think there should be any penalty whatsoever. I mean, this goes way beyond that person doesn't want to bake a cake.
Right. So if I can nationalize this for a moment, that we're going to get an opinion coming down from the Supreme Court in the Dobbs case, the abortion case. And if the opinion looks anything like the one that was previously leaked, it is going to say that Roe versus Wade it should be overruled because, look, the right to abortion is not in the Constitution. This language about, and part of what that opinion supposedly will say, if it resembles the one that was leaked, is that, hey, we're just talking about abortion. All the other stuff that the Supreme Court said was a right that's not in the Constitution, we're not going to mess with that, right? And one of those things is the Lawrence versus Texas, the right, not to be criminally prosecuted for same-sex sexual activity, and all of that's the right to birth control, all of that stuff around sexual privacy. Now, that I think part of what this Texas platform language brings up is, if we now have a return to the movement against homosexuality per se, that line that the Supreme Court is trying to draw will not hold up. You roll back Roe v. Wade, fine. You say it's not in the Constitution. Neither is the right of homosexuals to not be prosecuted or investigated for same-sex activity. And so we could be looking at a full-scale rollback of the right to privacy, at least in terms of being certified and protected by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, you should write a piece about that, how it relates to that particular Republican Party platform in the upcoming decision. But you will have it in a day or two. But that's a really good point. Very good point. Well, thank you so much. I don't know about you, but Charlie does such a great job. I think he should get more long weekends. And so maybe I'll be back next Monday and we can do this again.
That would be wonderful. I've really enjoyed this, Amanda. Thank you.
The Bulwark podcast is produced by Katie Cooper with audio production by Jonathan Siri. I'm Charlie Sykes. Thank you for listening to today's Bulwark podcast, and we'll be back tomorrow to do this all over again.
Thank you so much. I don't know about...
There are about 1 million podcasts about money, but Bad with Money with Gabby Dunn is the one where finances meet social justice.
Investing in dating with Bella Gandhi.
Do you believe that people should pay for dating apps?
To me, invest in the dating process. There's nothing more important than finding the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. There's a stigma. Everything should be free. You're going to go to Whole Foods, meet eyes over mangoes, and all the dominoes fall in perfect order. That's just a load of garbage.
Bad with Money. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.